Well, with her thoughts on all of this, we're now joined by Sara Mainville, Managing Partner at JFK Law. She is also a former chief of the Couchiching First Nation. Ms. Mainville, good to meet you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for asking me to be here.
Listen, there seemed to be a lack of understanding amongst the various parties this afternoon because, the Assembly did vote to have that MOU withdrawn. They did so earlier today. Concerned with the tanker ban, the lack of consultation ahead of last week's MOU announcement. But then, hours later, we hear the Prime Minister say that only after a project is presented to the Major Projects Office would consultations take place. So I do wonder, is the criticism getting ahead of the process?
I think it's continuing on a problem that's existed with these types of projects is that the project is propped up as something significant of economic benefit for the larger public, and then First Nations are faced with a sort of checkbox marking exercise called consultation and accommodation that really doesn't allow the project to be changed. Maybe the way the project is guided, like those really important early engagement processes that, have always been said, over the last 16 years, it's always been said, early engagement is the most important piece of doing consultation and accommodation right.
Okay, early engagement, although, I will say the Prime Minister stated that his intention, and the legislation also says this, is that consultation has to happen. And before a project can be designated to be in the national interest, these are the Prime Minister words, that free, prior, and informed consent from Indigenous communities must be provided. So I appreciate that the process might be flawed up until this point, but given the Prime Minister's stated intentions, can any comfort be taken from that?
I think from the forum in the summertime where Prime Minister Carney was in front of the chiefs, basically the messaging was, trust us, we'll get this right. And I think there's been a couple of missteps that are causing concern. And I think, the chiefs were very proactive as they did the resolution early in the day today, knowing that the Prime Minister was coming, and very clear, like there was a unanimous vote on these important support of the coastal First Nations in BC to say basically no to a pipeline going again through Prince Rupert.
Yeah.
So I think the real disconnect is sort of the process piece. I think one of the hopes was that we were going to do something different here. Some of the leadership, like Premier Wab Canoe, is trying to do the partnership before the project, and so that's sort of the expectation that other leaders would follow suit and do something different as opposed to the same recipe for sort of conflict.
Oh, I hear what you're saying about the real disconnect is the process, but we have heard, and this wasn't from the Prime Minister today, but we have heard his ministers say that the economic challenge from Donald Trump is so immediate, so dire, that this government is trying to move quickly with big projects. Is there any way to have consultation while also expediting a process to get projects off the ground and built?
Yeah, I think that these Indigenous-led projects are probably the way forward, and so there's a number of proposals from the First Nations themselves to make some of these projects, and he did mention a few of them in his speech. To be fair to the Prime Minister, he did mention a few of them that sort of are positively like Indigenous-led projects with Indigenous ownership in those projects. So I think the notion of another pipeline being in the mix, I think, is sort of against, two of the three premises that, First Nations want another pipeline. And the second one is that this will actually be, helping more of a clean economy kind of goalpost. I think it doesn't meet either of those things.
Now we did hear the Prime Minister say that there's going to be a meeting of the First Ministers that should take place early in the new year, and that meeting itself is going to be led by an agenda set by First Nations. How helpful do you think that meeting is actually going to be?
I think it's a good start. I think it's it's a doorway to bring more opportunities for the actual planning stages of some of these bigger projects, to actually have a real conversation at that level. I think is a good approach. Listening to the Prime Minister speak, I think that there are some pretty major concerns on the investment side of things, around like introducing a new water legislation as opposed to reintroducing the existing water legislation that was tabled under the Trudeau government, which is, I think, more meeting what First Nations want to see as far as water legislation and the exercise of First Nation jurisdiction in regarding water. So those are. I think that there's some concerns, and I think that there's a bit of frustration because the Prime Minister Carney is not necessarily listening to some of the First Nation proposals that have gone forward regarding the budget discussions and things of that nature. And it seems like we're getting sort of a watered down version of some of those proposals, including the water legislation. And there's also Indian Act reform with the S2 legislation that is again watered down, like it's not the fuller proposal that First Nations wanted in that legislation. So
it's not necessarily just the major projects, but how this government moves forward with other priorities as well.
Yeah, I think it's this idea that there's a bit of budget constraints. I think Prime Minister Carney, I think, was right to kind of mention the things that in their budget that they're safeguarding as far as some First Nation priorities, including getting rid of the boil water advisories and things of that nature. But it seems to be definitely there's going to be some financial impacts to First Nations because of these budget constraints that are rolling out. And again, the crisis created by the Trump administration is also something that is impacting First Nations, and they also want to be part of the discussion and being part of the decision making around what are the major projects that go forward.
Mm-hmm. Listen, Sara, I've only got a minute left, but I do want to ask you, if you were to give any advice to this government of how to move forward, what would that be? I think concentrating on those First Nation-led projects and really giving good energy to making them happen in a real robust way for First Nations economic benefits will really be I think setting a new standard, because I think with those First Nation-led projects you get to that arena of free, prior, and informed consent and set that standard for those more troublesome projects in the future. Sara Mainville, really appreciate the time and the insight. Thank you for this. Miigwech, thank you.